Arthur Montgomery, a fintech billionaire worth billions, returned to his Greenwich estate hours early, expecting silence. Instead, he froze in the doorway of his own kitchen. The scene unfolding on the polished marble floor hit him like a physical blow. His 6-year-old daughter, Sarah, paralyzed from the waist down since the accident that killed his first wife, was slumped on the floor. Her wheelchair was overturned beside her, surrounded by a puddle of steaming water and the acrid smell of industrial bleach. She was holding up her small hands, trembling violently. They weren't just red, they were crimson raw, the skin cracked open and actively bleeding. "Mommy, please," Sarah sobbed, her voice cracking with an agony that tore through Arthur's chest. My hands hurt. They itched so much. The only answer she received was a cruel, dismissive shriek from her new stepmother, Catherine. She stood over the small child, immaculate in a yellow designer dress, her face contorted with rage. "Stop complaining," Catherine snapped, her voice slicing through the air. "You're useless. You can't even wash one dress." That single, horrific instant ripped away the mask of luxury Arthur had paid millions for, exposing the ruthless, agonizing truth of the nightmare that had been happening in his own home the moment his back was turned. What city are you watching this video from, and what time is it? By the way, if you're enjoying my videos, I'd be so happy if you could subscribe to my channel and like this video. Before we continue, please take a moment to leave a comment about this story and rate it from 1 to 10. How are you feeling? If there's anything you'd like to share, I'm always here to listen. I hope you find a moment of peace and reflection as you follow this healing story and its journey of courage and justice. The Montgomery family's estate stood on a quiet, tree-lined street in Greenwich, Connecticut. The massive home, with its floor-to-ceiling windows, allowed daylight to flood in, casting bright reflections on the polished hardwood floors. Everything spoke of wealth and elegance, but the atmosphere inside was silent and cold. In the grand salon, an old ivory-colored piano rested by the main window. It was the instrument once treasured by Claire, Arthur Montgomery's first wife. Claire had been an exceptional pianist, a Juilliard graduate who had performed at Carnegie Hall. She loved music, as if it were the air she breathed, and she had passed that passion on to her young daughter, Sarah. Sarah Montgomery had just turned 6. 2 years ago, she could still run through the garden, her laughter filling the air as she shouted, "Daddy! Mommy!" whenever Arthur came home. But that terrible car accident had taken her mother's life and left her small body with legs paralyzed forever. Since then, Sarah could only sit in her wheelchair, watching the world from a height lower than everyone else, living with a void that could never be filled. Today, her wheelchair was parked in front of the piano. Sarah sat silently, her small hands resting on the keys, her deep brown eyes full of sadness. A melody began to rise, but it was hesitant, broken like short, irregular breaths. The weak notes faded almost as soon as they were born. They no longer carried the brightness they had when her mother was still alive. She stopped. Her trembling hands fell to her lap as she looked at the raw, red patches covering her skin. Her fingers burned with a sharp pain and an unbearable itch, but still Sarah longed to play the piano, because every time a sound emerged, she felt as if her mother's voice was echoing faintly nearby, as if she had returned to those peaceful days of the past. A wave of grief swelled in her chest. She remembered her mother's hand on her shoulder, the tender gaze, the warm smile. Now there was only her father, but he always seemed too busy. Sarah bit her lip and whispered in her thoughts, "I just want Dad to hug me once, but maybe he doesn't need a girl in a wheelchair like me." The door opened, pulling her back to the present. A tall man in a dark blue custom suit entered quickly. It was Arthur Montgomery, founder of a booming fintech firm and one of the faces the financial media constantly pursued. Arthur was known for his talent and his calm composure in business. But behind that success was a heart heavy with grief. His wife's death haunted him, and his daughter was a living reminder of that loss. Arthur strode forward, holding a phone to his ear, his voice urgent. "Yes, I'll be in San Francisco tomorrow." "No, I have to leave tonight." Arthur looked up and saw Sarah sitting by the piano. His voice became rushed and clipped. "Remember to eat well and listen to Catherine." "I have to go." He didn't even approach her. He didn't give her a kiss on the forehead before turning around. The sound of his footsteps grew heavier, and then faded beyond the door. Sarah lifted her head, her lips trembling. She wanted to scream, "Daddy!" but no sound came out. A knot formed in her throat. Her eyes followed his disappearing figure until only emptiness remained in the vast room. A faint scent of expensive perfume drifted into the air. Catherine Vance, Arthur's new wife, entered the room. Catherine was young, slender, with wavy black hair and a face that always wore a kind smile in front of her husband. She gave everyone the impression of being a loving, tender woman, ready to sacrifice for her family. "My dear, why are you sitting here alone? Don't forget to have lunch," Catherine said softly. Her eyes slid toward the piano. Her lips curved into a smile. Arthur turned, smiling at his wife. "I'm counting on you to take care of her. I know you'll do great, don't worry. I've always treated Sarah like my own daughter," Catherine replied sweetly, her hand resting lightly on Arthur's arm. Arthur nodded, and then left again in a hurry. The moment the front door clicked shut, Catherine's smile vanished. Her eyes turned to ice. Her voice dropped, but it became sharp. "No more piano. Go clean the kitchen." Sarah flinched and looked up. My hands hurt. I can't do it." Catherine bent down, her face close, her breath heavy with contempt. "Stop pretending to be weak. If you dare to talk back again, I'll make sure this piano disappears from the house." Sarah trembled, wanting to cling to the piano. Her eyes shone with desperation, as if silently begging for help. But before she could reach the keys, Catherine grabbed her hand and yanked her away from the chair. "Go right now, do you hear me?" she snapped. The wheelchair wobbled and tilted to one side. Sarah slid down, her small hands shaking, her eyes fixed on the piano. The keys blurred in her vision, like the only oasis moving out of her reach. In that moment, her eyes filled with tears. The sharp click-clack of Catherine's heels echoed on the hardwood floor, drowning out Sarah's choked breaths. Sarah's hands were already red and raw, but she still tried to scrub everything to please Catherine. 2 long hours passed, and it seemed things might finally calm down. Until then. In the brightly lit kitchen, Catherine walked toward the table. On the nearby chair was a gleaming red silk designer gown. She picked it up, her eyes scanning it quickly as if inspecting every seam. Then, without warning, Catherine threw it forcefully onto the floor. The soft fabric slithered across the polished tiles, stopping right at Sarah's feet. "Wash it again. It wasn't to my liking yesterday." Catherine's voice was flat, but it dripped with contempt. Sarah looked down at the red dress. The vivid color hurt her eyes. She remembered once seeing her mother wear a red dress on stage. Her radiant smile shining under the lights. That image flickered and faded, replaced by the burning itch spreading across her fingers. Sarah swallowed, hesitating, and then whispered softly, "My hands, they itch so much. I can't hold it anymore." Catherine crossed her arms and leaned against the edge of the counter, a mocking smile playing on her lips. In the daylight, her wavy black hair moved slightly, and her eyes gleamed with open disdain. "Useless. You're already a cripple. The least you could do is be useful. You can't even wash a simple dress. Or do you plan to just sit there your whole life, letting others do everything for you?" Sarah dug her fingers into the armrest of her wheelchair. She looked down, too scared to defend herself. She leaned forward to pick up the dress, each movement heavy, as if she were lifting a stone. The moment the fabric brushed her skin, her fingertips burned and stung. Catherine glanced at her sideways, then walked calmly to the large window, picked up her teacup from the table, and took a slow sip. She wore a fitted yellow dress, her posture tall and elegant, the perfect image of a refined lady from a distance. But to Sarah, every gesture radiated threat. "Hurry up. I don't have time to wait for you." Catherine turned her head, her voice as cold as a knife's edge. Sarah struggled to place the dress in the basin of water. The industrial-strength bleach had already been poured. A harsh chemical foam rose to the surface. She put her hands in, trembling from the cold sting. The chemical water seeped into her scratches, burning every layer of skin. She gritted her teeth and tried to rub the fabric gently. Every time her hands touched the cloth, the itch intensified again, forcing her to stop and scratch before continuing. Sweat beaded on her forehead, mixing with the splashes from the basin that soaked her pale blue clothes. The damp fabric clung to her skin. Her hair, tangled and messy, stuck to her cheeks, covering half her face. Sarah tried to suppress her sobs, but eventually her resistance broke. She burst into tears. Her choked voice trembled as she cried out, "Mommy, my hands hurt and they itch so much. I can't take it anymore." The sound echoed in the bright kitchen, bouncing off the tiled walls like a desperate plea. Catherine slammed her teacup on the counter, the porcelain hitting the marble with a sharp crack. She strode quickly toward Sarah, her heels clicking against the floor. Bending down, Catherine pointed a finger at the girl's tear-streaked face, her voice grinding between clenched teeth. "Stop complaining. Do you want me to hit you? Save the crying for later. Finish scrubbing that dress first." Sarah lifted her tear-stained face, her eyes red and swollen. She couldn't say a word, just trembled as she tried to keep rubbing the fabric. But this time, the tip of her finger split open. Blood welled up in small drops, mixing with the bleach bubbles. She whimpered softly. Then she lost all strength, slumping to the floor as her wheelchair overturned to the side, wobbling. Sarah's small body was soaked, shivering with cold. Catherine let out a dismissive laugh, her voice sharp and cruel. "A useless child. Really, your father thought he was raising a treasure. You're nothing but a burden." Sarah clutched her hand. Her small fingers trembled uncontrollably. Every word Catherine said pierced her heart like a needle. She could only sob. The only wish in her heart echoed silently. "Daddy, come home. Don't leave me here anymore." Just then, the sound of the front door bursting open echoed through the house. Heavy, hurried footsteps thudded, each step pressing down on the air. Catherine froze. Whirling around, Arthur Montgomery appeared in the kitchen doorway. He was wearing his dark blue suit, his tie still loose, sweat shining on his forehead. A partner had suddenly canceled a crucial meeting, so Arthur had turned his car around and come home without warning. The moment he stepped in, he saw the scene. His daughter, soaked, sitting helplessly on the floor next to a basin of chemical water, her hands raw and covered in scratches, sobbing desperately. And Catherine was standing there in her fitted yellow dress, her finger still pointing, her voice caught mid-shout. Arthur stopped dead. His chest heaved, his fists clenched tightly, his eyes darkened, fury igniting like fire. In the bright kitchen, the air became suffocatingly dense. Sarah lifted her head. Her eyes went wide when she saw her father. Catherine flinched slightly, then forced herself to appear calm. Arthur's voice thundered, hoarse and heavy, each word hitting the air like a hammer. "Catherine," the room froze. Sarah trembled. Catherine was paralyzed for an instant. And in that brief silence, a terrifying stillness fell, foreshadowing the storm of rage that was about to erupt. Arthur's heavy voice chilled the air in the kitchen. Catherine stiffened. Her face paled for a moment. Sarah lifted her tear-streaked eyes. A flicker of hope shone as she saw her father standing, imposing, in the doorway. Arthur moved forward without hesitation, bent down, and lifted Sarah from the floor. Her small body was soaked, trembling in his arms like a fragile bird seeking shelter. "Daddy." Sarah clung tightly to his shoulder, her voice breaking between sobs. Catherine quickly changed her tone, following him. "Arthur, you misunderstood. I was just teaching her to be independent. She needs to learn to work. She can't just be weak forever." Arthur spun around abruptly. His eyes burned red with rage. His voice thundered. "Enough. I saw it all with my own eyes. You have no excuses left." Sarah burrowed deeper into her father's chest, sobbing. "Daddy, my hands hurt so much." Her words pierced Arthur's heart. He took a sharp breath and carried her quickly toward the front door. Catherine, panicked, ran after him, grabbing his arm tightly. "Listen to me. She makes things up to get pity. I didn't do anything wrong. Don't let outsiders laugh at our family." Arthur stopped, turning his head to look directly at her, his voice ice cold. "From this moment on, you will never touch her again." He yanked his arm away forcefully and kept walking. Catherine stumbled back, her false mask shattered, her eyes flashing with hatred. Arthur carried Sarah to the car and placed her gently in the back seat. He threaded the seatbelt, buckling it firmly as if trying to protect her from all pain. The car door shut, insulating them from the heavy air of the house. The engine roared, and the car slipped onto the sunny road. Inside the vehicle, only Sarah's faint breathing mixed with soft sobs. Arthur looked at her in the rearview mirror. Her small hands clutched each other, covered in red welts. After a long silence, Sarah spoke timidly, her voice trembling with fear. You won't leave me again, will you?" A lump formed in Arthur's throat. He didn't answer immediately. His eyes were fixed on the road, though his eyelids felt heavy, shining. That question stabbed directly into his heart like a blade. His grip tightened on the steering wheel. When he finally spoke, his voice wavered. "I'm here now." The car pulled up to Yale New Haven Hospital, one of the largest medical centers in the region. The grounds were shaded by trees, bustling with people coming and going. Arthur quickly lifted Sarah into his arms and hurried inside. In the pediatric clinic, a middle-aged doctor in a white coat emerged. She had a small frame, but her eyes were sharp and stern. This was Dr. Evelyn Reed, a pediatric dermatologist who had spent many years treating children with chronic skin conditions. Her colleagues often described her as strict but deeply compassionate. "Mr. Montgomery, is this the young patient?" Her voice was firm and clear. Arthur nodded and placed Sarah on the examination table. "Please, doctor, take a look at my daughter." His words trailed off, his voice tight. Dr. Reed put on gloves and carefully lifted Sarah's small hands. The moment she touched them, Sarah winced. Her face crumpled in pain. Red patches, scratches, and several cracked areas were clearly visible under the light. The doctor frowned slightly, examining each finger closely. "Do you often have to put your hands in soapy water?" she asked gently, her eyes still fixed on the skin. Sarah glanced at her father, then lowered her head and whispered, "Yes, she makes me wash the clothes." Arthur gripped the armrest beside him, his teeth grinding. He didn't interrupt, just kept his eyes on his daughter as a storm of anger and guilt surged inside him. Dr. Reed tilted her head, her gaze cold and penetrating. She addressed Arthur curtly, "I need to run some quick tests. Please wait outside." Arthur nodded and walked out into the hallway. He sat on a bench, his hands pressed to his forehead, drowning in helplessness. The image of Sarah crying in the kitchen replayed in his mind, making him tremble uncontrollably. After a while, the door opened. Dr. Reed came out holding a clipboard. She looked directly into Arthur's eyes and spoke firmly, without hesitation. "These are not accidental injuries. The child has been subjected to abuse over a long period of time." They spoke for several minutes, and with every word that came from the doctor's mouth, Arthur's face grew heavier, overwhelmed by anguish. After many hours at the hospital, Arthur brought Sarah back to the house that was once their home, but was now filled with a cold silence. As he opened the door, the familiar space appeared before him. This time, however, Arthur saw everything differently. The sofa, the staircase, the framed pictures on the wall, everything seemed to be a witness to the silent suffering his daughter had endured. Sarah was exhausted. Arthur pushed her wheelchair into the bedroom, pulled the blanket up to cover her, and sat beside her. Her small hand was still carefully bandaged, fragile fingers peeking out in a way that broke his heart. The girl looked at her father, lips trembling as if she wanted to say something. But then she remained silent. Arthur put his hand on her shoulder and whispered, "Rest, I'm here now." Sarah's eyes filled with tears. She nodded weakly, then closed her eyes as her breathing slowly evened out. Arthur sat still for a while, watching her sleep. His chest was torn between pain and determination, silently vowing that he had to act. Once he was sure Sarah was asleep, he stood up and quietly left the room. His steps echoed heavily down the long hallway, each sound a reminder of the responsibility he had neglected. Arthur went straight to his study. The door closed behind him with a dry click. The room, once the place where he closed multi-million-dollar deals, now felt like a refuge, a place where he was forced to face the truth. He sat in his chair, took a deep breath, and then leaned down to open the bottom drawer of his desk. Inside, a small black USB drive lay among several folders. Arthur picked it up, his hand trembling slightly. The coldness of that small object made his heart pound. The USB drive wasn't new. It had been there for 6 months, saving data from the hidden cameras Arthur himself had placed in the house. Back then, he had started to notice Catherine's strange behavior. The cold glint in her eyes whenever she thought no one was watching, and the way Sarah flinched whenever she came near. Arthur hadn't wanted to believe it, but his uneasiness forced him to prepare. One sleepless night, he had installed cameras in hidden corners: the kitchen, the hallway near Sarah's room, and the salon where the piano was. Afterward, he tormented himself for hours. Part of him felt he was betraying his new wife, while another part feared that if his suspicion was wrong, he would look like nothing but a blind, paranoid man. So, even though data had been saved to the USB drive every day, Arthur had never found the courage to open it. He fooled himself into believing everything was fine, that Catherine was taking good care of his daughter. In reality, he was terrified of facing the truth, because that would mean admitting he had been wrong to trust her and give her so much power. But today was different. The image of Sarah sobbing and begging, her hands red and swollen under the hospital lights, and the cold confirmation from Dr. Reed had torn down all the barriers. Arthur could no longer hide. He slid the USB drive into the computer's port. A sharp beep sounded. The screen lit up, and the video files began to appear one by one. Taking a deep breath, Arthur swallowed, his eyes fixed on the screen, preparing for the truth to unfold, no matter how cruel it might be. At first, Catherine appeared in the kitchen. The sweet smile was gone. Her face revealed nothing but cruelty. She threw a bowl of water directly onto the floor, her voice sharp and authoritarian. In the corner, Sarah pressed herself against the wall, her trembling hands submerged in a basin, scrubbing as she scratched her skin raw. Arthur leaned back in his chair. His chest tightened. He forced himself to keep watching. In another clip, Catherine stood blocking the piano. Her eyes burned, her voice shrill. "I forbid you to touch this, understand?" Sarah sat in her wheelchair. Tears streamed down her face, her small hands gripping the seat tightly. Arthur closed his eyes. His own hand clenched into a fist so tight his knuckles turned white. He whispered, his voice broken, "Claire, I let her suffer for so long." The name of his late wife escaped like a stab to the heart. The image of Claire in her white dress from years ago returned to his mind. Her smile, her music, and the look of happiness in her eyes as she looked at their daughter. Arthur bowed his head, his vision blurred by tears. A sudden, soft knock echoed. Arthur quickly wiped his eyes and then looked toward the door. Catherine entered with a calm demeanor. She wore a neat dress, carrying a tray of steaming soup. "You're back. I made you soup. Want some?" Catherine's voice dripped with sweetness. Arthur didn't respond. He remained motionless. His eyes were fixed on the computer screen, where an image of Catherine screaming at Sarah was frozen mid-frame. Catherine flinched briefly upon seeing it, but quickly regained her composure. "What are you watching? Don't let these trivial things affect our family. I just want what's best for Sarah. You know that." Arthur turned his head, his gaze so cold that Catherine instinctively took a step back. He spoke slowly but clearly. "Tomorrow you will face the court." Catherine froze. Her face turned pale, but within seconds she forced a tense smile. Her voice rose sharply. "You'll regret trusting a child's word over your own wife's. Arthur, don't you see? She's just trying to tear us apart." Arthur stood up abruptly, towering over her. He looked directly into her eyes, every word sharp as a blade. "I saw everything. The cameras don't lie." The air thickened. Catherine stood still. Her lips trembled. For a moment, fear flickered in her eyes, but it was soon replaced by a fierce, burning hatred. Arthur said nothing more. He bent down, pulled the USB drive from the computer, and slipped it into his jacket pocket. The next morning, the gray sky cast a shadow over the imposing New Haven County Courthouse. A dense crowd of reporters had gathered. A black car pulled up. Arthur Montgomery got out, his face grim, and gently lifted Sarah from her wheelchair. The girl wore a simple white dress, her hands still wrapped in bandages. "Stay with me," Arthur whispered. "It will all be over soon." Inside the courtroom, the air was heavy. Arthur sat with his lawyer, Michael Harrison, a tall, severe-faced man known for defending abused children. Across from them, Catherine sat with her high-priced attorney. Mr. Harrison stood. "Your Honor, We will prove that Sarah Montgomery has suffered prolonged physical and psychological abuse at the hands of her stepmother, Mrs. Catherine Vance. The large screen lit up. The videos played. Catherine screaming, Sarah sobbing, her hands raw. The courtroom fell silent. When it was her turn, Catherine wept. I love Sarah. I was only trying to teach her to be independent. She lies to get pity. Her lawyer then presented a medical report. Your Honor, this report from a child psychologist suggests Sarah shows signs of psychological instability, even self-harming for her father's attention. A gasp went through the room. Arthur felt his blood run cold, but Mr. Harrison was ready. The prosecution calls Dr. Evelyn Reed to the stand. Dr. Reed, the pediatric dermatologist from Yale New Haven, took the stand. Her voice was firm. I examined Sarah Montgomery. The injuries to her hands are not self-inflicted. They are chemical burns, the result of repeated, forced exposure to industrial cleaning agents. The pattern of scarring is undeniable. This is abuse. Harrison turned to Catherine's lawyer. The psychologist you cited, Dr. Reed, can you confirm his credentials? Dr. Reed looked at the report. I can. He isn't a child psychologist. He lost his medical license 2 years ago for falsifying documents. This report is fraudulent. The courtroom erupted. Catherine's composure shattered. She leaped to her feet, her voice a piercing shriek, pointing at Sarah. That useless child. She sits in that chair. She has no future. I sacrificed my youth, and all she did was sit there like a burden. The outburst exploded in the room. People gasped. The reporters' cameras flashed wildly. Enough, Catherine, Arthur's voice thundered, cutting through the silence. The judge slammed his gavel. Order! Mrs. Vance, your own words have revealed your true attitude. This court finds the evidence overwhelming. You will be remanded into custody until your criminal trial. As security officers led a screaming Catherine away, Arthur rushed to Sarah, pulling her into his arms. He felt her small heart pounding against his chest. Under the flash of countless cameras, he silently swore he would protect her, no matter what came next. Arthur never returned to the Greenwich mansion. He moved Sarah to a smaller, quieter house in a peaceful neighborhood. It wasn't luxurious, but it was a home. He immediately had the ivory piano moved in and placed it by the large living room window. When Sarah saw it, her eyes widened, a spark of emotion Arthur hadn't seen in years. Do you want to try? He asked gently. Sarah looked at her bandaged hands and slowly shook her head. I'm not ready yet, Arthur nodded. He didn't press. He sat down and played a simple chord. The sound was pure and clear. It was enough to make Sarah lift her head, the faintest smile appearing on her lips. That night the phone rang. A reporter from the New York Times. Mr. Montgomery, we've received information you neglected your daughter for years. Are you willing to comment? The media storm exploded. Some papers vilified Arthur as the absentee billionaire. But others, seeing the evidence from the trial, rallied behind Sarah. The hashtag Justice for Sarah spread across the country. Arthur knew he couldn't hide. He held a press conference. He didn't make excuses. I was wrong. He told the cameras, his voice steady. I let my work consume me, and I failed to protect my daughter. I cannot change my past, but I can dedicate my life to her future. This isn't just my story. It's for every child suffering in silence. We must listen. The public opinion shifted. Weeks later, an envelope arrived. It was an invitation from Carnegie Hall in New York City. They wanted Sarah to perform in a special concert for children who had overcome adversity. Arthur's hands trembled. He looked at Sarah. They want you to play, sweetheart? Sarah looked at the piano, then at her father. For the first time, her eyes weren't filled with fear, but with a fragile determination. Okay, she whispered. They practiced every day. At first, the notes were hesitant. Sometimes Sarah would cry in frustration. I'm scared, Daddy. What if they laugh at me? No one has the right to laugh at you, Arthur would say, his hand on her shoulder. Just remember, every note you play is a step away from the darkness, and I will be right here with you. The night of the concert, Carnegie Hall was sold out. Arthur wheeled Sarah to the center of the stage. A single spotlight hit the piano. The vast hall was completely silent. Arthur knelt beside her. Play as if you're at home, Sarah. Let the music guide you. Sarah took a deep breath and placed her hands, now healed but scarred, on the keys. The first notes sounded, It was the piece Claire used to play. The melody started softly, then grew stronger, filling the massive hall. Hundreds of people held their breath. In the front row, Arthur sat, his vision blurring with tears. In the music, he saw the image of Claire, her hands gently guiding Sarah's. His heart ached, but it was an ache of release, not just grief. Sarah closed her eyes, lost in the music. The pain, the harsh words, the bleach, it all seemed to dissolve into the notes. The piece ended with a resounding chord. Sarah opened her eyes. The hall was silent for a beat. Then Arthur leaped to his feet, applauding. In an instant, the entire audience was standing, the applause thundering like waves, a roar of validation and love. Sarah looked at her father, who was weeping openly, his face shining with a pride she had never seen. And for the first time in her life, she smiled brightly, under the lights, for everyone to see. A year later, the small house was filled with laughter. Sarah, though still in her chair, now taught music to other children at the local community center. Arthur, having sold his company, was simply Dad. One afternoon, he sat on the porch listening to the sound of the piano. Sarah was practicing, the notes firm and warm. Arthur looked up at the sky. "Do you see this, Claire?" he whispered. "She didn't just survive. She's shining. The story has come to its end." From those painful tears, a little girl finally reclaimed her voice. The message is clear. Evil will be punished, and good will be rewarded. No matter how thick the darkness, the light of truth and justice will always shine. This is the true power of healing stories. And now, I want to know, are you doing okay? If you feel tired today, please remember that love can heal even the deepest wounds.